Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program. I am your host, Chris George Zuger, and you have entered the Den of Lore. Pull your chair up to the fire, grab your glass of scotch, because we're going to learn some cool shit tonight, courtesy of none other than author and cave art painting interpreter extraordinaire Bernie Taylor. We're going to be discussing his new book, Before Orion, Finding the Face of the Hero, as well as looking at the hero's journey and talking about the origins of our civilization during the last ice age. And welcome to the show once again. I hope everyone had a fantastic week. Mine was chock full of interesting times and adventures, especially since we just had a flash freeze. We went from plus 10 Celsius down to, well, I think we're at minus 15 or 20 right now. We're going to be going down to minus 30 tomorrow. Let's see, in American, that's 50 degrees down to minus 17 in the space of 24 hours. Yep, things are fun here in Canada land. But you know what's also fun? Seeing all of you every single week, or hearing all of you every single week, and talking to each of you in the chat room here on the YouTube channel. And again, thank you for all of those who are joining us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. I believe I do have that all, and I know that we're going to be returning to Deprogram Radio once that launches once again. And, you know, I have to say is that this show would not be possible, and our distribution would not be possible, if it were not for our patrons. As you do know, it is very difficult nowadays to, well, get a good point across, especially if you've got sponsors. They tend to make you want to say a certain thing a certain way, and they kind of care about the subject matter you have on your show, and we know that it is fantastic to have a wide variety of opinions from a wide variety of walks of life, even if we do not necessarily agree with it. And we would not be able to do that every single week if it is not for our patrons, especially to our illustrious masters and masters. Our illustrious masters, Jackie from across the pond, Pat from Brooklyn, and to our masters, Lee Veltman, Chuck Schwartz, Fredrik Jonsson, Jared Thomson, Mrs. Fox, Roses, Wayne, Joshua E. Mattock, Marc Catalano, and our den mother, Ellen McCurdy, as well as to the rest of our patrons, Koray Yurt, Charles Davis, Dobromir Raynov, Thiago Bauer, Michael Eickhoff, Dean John Kenward, Anthony Derry, Atlantic Kush, Vanese from Magical Egypt, Christopher Moody, Robin Webley, and Hobby, courtesy of denoflore.com. I want to say thank you very much for all of our supporters, because, you know, our listeners are our sponsors, and you ensure that we have been able to survive and grow and thrive in 2017, and we're hoping and planning for a very prosperous 2018 as we get over this chill. And again, I'm going to welcome to the program, and he's been waiting patiently. On screen is our guest for this evening, Mr. Bernie Taylor. Bernie, how are you doing tonight?
Well, I'm doing great here, Chris. I'm in Portland, Oregon. We're not too far from the ocean, and it's probably in the mid-50s, sort of like Mediterranean.
Well, you know, it's, yeah, mid-50s, even in the middle of January. Very similar to BC weather. I know that you guys are very close, give or take, 700 to 1,000 kilometers. It's that Pacific water. It brings in all of that fantastic tropical weather all the way up the West Coast, and I can't say that I'm not just a little bit jealous of your good fortune. When we get this kind of weather in January, it usually means burst pipes, dammed roofs, and a whole host of other flooding nightmares. So I'm hoping that you get that continuing weather trend, and you don't have to deal with the crap I have to deal with probably in the springtime when it comes to house repairs.
Well, we just don't have moderate winters, but we have moderate summers as well. The Pacific Ocean modulates the temperatures, which makes it conducive for Pinot Noir grapes, which is famous for this part of Oregon.
And that I actually know. I've got a few of my design clients. They run a restaurant, and they actually have some wines from Oregon. So it's not Oregon, it's Washington, and I believe it's actually a Pinot Noir. My interesting part, I know that this is very much digressing from the subject matter we normally talk about on the show, but I was very impressed with the Zinfandel that was coming out of Northern California back in 2013, 2014, which I know is not necessarily in the area, and California is a fairly large area, but the West Coast is very good for wines. It's why good wines come out of BC, and, you know, a lot of that can come down to the modulated weather, but also a lot of sediment that's in that area due to the volcanic ash that was, well, pretty well dumped on there by the very large supervolcano, which is right next door to you guys.
And the Missouri flood. That put a lot of the sediments into the soil. So a lot of the soils are named after that flood.
Well, the scablands, those were created after the end of the last, or at least the theory goes that they were created at the end of the last ice age due to a theoretical comet impact. And we've had a few people on the show, as you may know, who have discussed that. And the subject matter we're talking about today is born out of that era, or much earlier than the purported 12,860-some years ago. When you and I sat down and talked last, you were talking about an age of roughly 33,000 years ago, which is much earlier than the average time that most alternative history researchers bring up. How did you get this dating, and you know, how did you want to be able to start bring us on this hero's journey? And
well, we're going to start 40,000 years ago.
Oh man!
And I'm going to bring up a.
I'm going to bring this up here. Now, this is the beautiful part. We haven't actually done this on the show in a while. Bernie actually had prepared a slide presentation for today. And it's been... the last lecture we had, I think, was with Gary A. David way back in November. So this is a big treat. These are usually some of our best shows. So please, Bernie...
And I'm going to duck out of this presentation. You're not going to see me there for a bit. So that I don't...
shrinking to the bottom.
In the way of the slides.
Right hand.
We're going to start this. I'm going to move off. We're going to start this presentation in the Paleolithic. The program is titled "The Hero's Journey from the Paleolithic." And as a warning label, I'm going to take you into the psychology of the Paleolithic man. So, what did he feel, and what did he think? This will be a journey. To start our journey, I'm going to bring in a Tuareg riddle. The Tuareg are people of the Sahara, Greater Sahara, and they have a riddle: how many hairs does a man have? So, Chris, you can start rubbing through your head and take that hat off, and you can, it's a question that's difficult to answer because we're all different.
Now, Bernie, I hate to cut in, but your voice is cutting out a little bit.
Is this better?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, great. And so we're going to ask this question throughout the program, and we're going to go to Bilbao in the northern part of Spain, in the Cantabria region, and to the cave of Monte Castillo. Monte Castillo is very pyramidal shaped, and it holds the oldest cave art known to man, or has been recorded by man. And there are dots. One is dated to about 40,000 years ago, and the other is dated to 37,000 years ago. And this was published in Science and the major journals. It was a chemical test. And this was big news at the time because it became the oldest images of mankind. And when they wanted to release this to the press, this image that you see before us didn't make a very good picture. Or alternatively, they just show you one dot or two. And the next slide gives you the concept of what one dot might have looked like. See those little stenciled hands. It didn't make a very good story to the media. So what they did was they pulled in the panel of discs, the gallery of discs, which dates to about 34,000 years ago using the same method. And this image, or this panel, has been seen for more than 100 years. Millions of people saw this image in the popular and scientific media as a result of the news stories that came out about that disc of 40,000 years ago. This made a much better picture. And this image was taken by the Spanish photographer Pedro ßauer. It's about 10 meters across. So this is a huge panel. And there's been a lot of scientific research on this panel, and they've counted the discs. They've saw the different ways they could have been made. And they basically came up with it's a lot of discs. But when we enter this, we can think about it as a Paleolithic apprentice might have been. He might have walked into the cave with his teacher, and the teacher might have asked him a question similar to how many hairs does a man have, is what do you see on this panel? And of course, the apprentice, the first thing he's going to start doing is counting the red discs, just as the scientists have done in modern times. And they would probably come up to about, apprentice might come up to about 90 discs or so. And teacher might have asked him a little further, well, what else do you see in the red discs? He probably wouldn't have seen this image. And this is towards down to the viewer's bottom right of the gallery of discs. And you see it, the teacher and his apprentice etched into the wall. And two of the discs are the eyes of the apprentice, which makes a spectacular scene. Now, my guess is that the apprentice, when he first went into that cave, he didn't see this, because he would have been in trance just like we have been by staring at these red discs. And the story, when we look at this, we see the teacher speaking to the ear of the apprentice. He's telling him something. Perhaps he's telling him a story. Because one would think the first things we passed on to generations would have been stories. Are seeing as well as storytelling. Now, what's a little more spectacular about this image is on the left shoulder of the teacher is a golden eagle. And you can see the unmarked image to the viewer's left, and then the cutout to the right, of course. Now, this juvenile eagle is about in the month of June, probably mid-June, based on the down on its side. So it's a fledgling eagle. It hasn't flown yet, and about the height from the shoulder to the top of the head. Now, the artist captured this two different ways. It gives two perspectives, just like the eagle. One is that we have the eagle cuts the hairline of the teacher that makes his hairline, as well as his cheeks. It's also standing on his shoulder.
Bernie, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your voice is continuously cutting in and out. Is there a for your microphone? Are you close by, or is there a way that you can adjust it so that the
how's that?
Try again.
Okay. And so it's a spectacular image that we have this teacher on the shoulder is of the eagle.
Okay.
Joseph Campbell talked about this concept of the storytelling, and he described it as the hero's journey. And Campbell said that there's a core myth, this monomyth that all cultures around the world tell. It's a story of a person, an individual that leaves a place of his home or her home, an ordinary place, just as Luke Skywalker leaves his home to go on a journey. And Luke is looking for something exciting in the world. And of course, on that journey, he has helpers. He has Obi-Wan Kenobi and he has Yoda who guide him on his way. And these helpers, we find them in the Lord of the Rings through Gandalf. In the Harry Potter stories, a multitude of characters that help out Harry. And in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy has 3 helpers: the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, as well as a witch. And on this journey, people are tested. They're given challenges, both emotional and mental challenges. And Joseph Campbell drew much of his idea from the work of the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. You had Laura London on some time back who talked a lot about Jung. Jung had a dream early in his life, and he was walking into a house. And it was a house of modern times. And as he walks down the hallway, he finds that the plaster is coming off, and that the plaster at that point is not of the house he entered, but rather something more of ancient times, the Greeks and the Romans. He walks further down into the hallway, and he encounters that he's in a cave, and he sees it as a Paleolithic cave. And in this dream, he comes to a recognition that as we go deeper into our minds, we're going deeper into the Paleolithic. We're going back to our original selves. After that experience, Jung, in a frenzy, went through the mythological literature, and he came to the same conclusion that Campbell ultimately did, that there is this monomyth, there's this core story about a journey. So this concept goes back in the literature much further than my work. And in that story, there's actually in the monomyths and in the dreams of Jung's patients, he found that there was common themes and common places. And one of the places was a mountain, and another was a body of water. And on the apprentice's journey, there's always this climb up the cosmic mountain, just as Frodo climbs the mountain at the end of The Lord of the Rings. And as I wrote it, the initiate continues along the path, smoothed by thousands of feet, that had carried half as many souls, considering what may be found on the top of the cosmic mountain. And of course, around the El Castillo mountain, or the Monte Castillo, there's also a river.
Whoa. So
we're going to go back to this gallery of discs for a moment and take a look at what might be there. Kind of look deeper into it. We've seen the teacher and the apprentice, but what else might be there? This might be a cultural time capsule, as Jung had found in the minds of his patients, and Joseph Campbell had surmised in the myths. Well, it's towards the center of the panel. There's an elephant. This is an elephant with its ear down and its trunk down, as if it's drinking or walking towards the drink water. It's a fascinating image. And it's an African elephant based on the shape of the head. They were straight-tusked elephants in Europe at the time. They had a humped head. So it's a different elephant. And if we flip it around 90 degrees, we find another elephant in the same image. And this one has its ear raised, as well as its trunk, as it's in distress. So we're finding two characters in a story of this elephant. It's a fascinating image. And the next image, we can see them side by side to compare. And these are two African elephants. And what we see in this is that there's no certainty when you look at a panel like this. There's only what we recognize in the moment, a perspective that may shift with our focus to experience what had not been probable, if not possible, only moments earlier. So this takes us back to the Tuareg riddle, that we can, there can be multiple perspectives. And we can go back to look at the gallery of discs on this image, and we can see the elephant there in the middle with its raised trunk. So this is an unmarked image. And if we shift it 90 degrees in our minds, we can see the elephant with the trunk down. So millions of people in the popular science and scientific literature have seen this image. And everybody missed the elephant in the room. And that's pretty important, because how could we miss something that's so important, that you have an African elephant in a European cave? And if we continue looking down the panel, we can find a horse, a speckled mare. This is actually Brzezinski's horse, which is indigenous to Eurasia. So this was one of the original horses in Europe. This was not an African horse, which also gives us a point of location in the story. And behind that horse, we find what I describe as the cosmic man. We can see a man with his mask. And he's one side of the mask is on the viewer's left side of the mask is the beak of an eagle. So the man has become an eagle. On the right side, the viewer's right side, you can see his eye. And he's holding an egg, a fairly large egg. And his left arm has the texture and the look of a wing. So this man has become a winged being, an avianoid, something like an angel. And of course, we can tell that this person is in fact a man. And if we overlapped the cosmic man with this the horse, the speckled mare, we have a cosmic rider. So in this image, the two beings have become one, going back 34,000 years ago in this cave. So there's a transformation in the minds of the Paleolithic artist. There's multiple perspectives that can be seen at the same time and to be considered. And continuing down this path of multiple perspectives, if we take the mask of the cosmic man and we rotate it up, it's actually the face of the teacher. So you can look at them side by side. So going back to this concept, there's never one truth. There's always multiple perspectives. And if someone's studying to be a shamanic or teach a spiritual teacher, and to lead the clan, they really need to understand that people are all different. That everybody sees the world different. And that was much of the work of Carl Jung, whereas the introverts, the extroverts, the thinkers, the feelers, and so on, which became the Myers-Briggs test. That's fairly popular in the business world. We can continue this road of transformation going down the panel, and we see a man which puts on a mask. And as he puts on that mask, he becomes another being. Just as the cosmic man puts on the mask of the golden eagle to become the golden eagle. So people believed in that time that one could transcend, one could be something else, one could be another being when they put on such a mask. And in the tradition of the Egyptians, Horus is the falcon, who is an intermediary between heaven and earth. Perhaps that tradition came from more distant in time from the Paleolithic. And that transition is fairly common around hunter-gatherers around the world, whereas the spiritual leader puts on a bird's mask to communicate with the great beyond. And if we continue looking down this panel, we see more images. And this one is of a mother Iberian lynx, which is, of course, indigenous to Spain, and her kitten. It's a fascinating image. And when I first started on this project, I communicated with someone from my distant past who I met when I lived in China in my early 20s, which is more than 30 years ago. And his name is George SSauer. And George SSauer at the time was one of the most foremost wildlife biologists in the world. And I contacted George, and I started asking him questions. I asked him the questions about what kind of elephant this is and some of the other animals. And we played with this one as well. And George identified this as an Iberian lynx. And George is... he is, as I said, he's considered the world's foremost wildlife biologist. He was the mentor of Jane Goodall and many others. But what's interesting is that when I would ask George the questions, he just didn't give me taxonomic details. But in this case, he talked about the emotional moment of this lynx. And you can see that the kitten is pushing up against the chin of their mother cat. So the artist had a sense of empathy, that the artist understood that these were not just wild animals, that these were emotional beings. And, Jane Goodall carried on that tradition in her work, and Jane says that we should be kind to animals because it makes better humans of us all. And as we continue down the panel, we're going to see more beings. In this case, we're going to see it's either a spinning bottlenose dolphin or it's multiple bottlenose dolphins. And I looked at this one for over a year when I was working on the project, and I saw the mouth and I saw the eye, and I just couldn't figure it out because it didn't suit any land animals. But as my mind expanded, and I realized that, well, maybe this person's traveling. Maybe there's a journey involved. That journey that Luke Skywalker takes across space, perhaps the same journey that this apprentice is taking across an ocean body. And hence he meets the dolphin. He encounters the dolphin. But this one was really a struggle at first to recognize because my mind was stuck on this concept that everything had to be something that was in a Paleolithic image already. And so when we can go back to the image, you can see that the shape of the form of the dolphin. Or dolphins in this image. In the base image, you can see the bottlenose that sticks out. You can see the different fins, and it's a fascinating journey that we're taking. If we go further down the panel, we find a Mediterranean monk seal,
So the artist on this huge 10-meter panel is creating life-size animal beings that overlap with each other. They overlap body parts. And this one is telling us again that there's a body of water. It's that the artist is telling us that there's a journey that started in Spain, where we find the Iberian lynx, and travels across the water. And if there's a travel across water, one would expect a swimmer. We have a swimmer. He's up by the elephant, and he has two lower arms. He's doing a freestyle crawl type of swim, and his head is bobbing up and down. I looked at this for a long time, and probably for the first year, I saw the person. I saw his movement, and I thought that he was climbing, because he had that motion of kind of going up and down. And then ultimately I realized that in conjunction with the animals that are around him, particularly the dolphin, this person is swimming. And he becomes our first hero. He's taken that journey across water, the journey into the beyond, to the place of our imagination.
And his name was Tripod.
And his name was Tripod, yeah. And he's got big, strong shoulders.
Always got a big, strong something. I'm sorry, it's a very lifelike depiction.
That's good. And I believe that the journey of the apprentice is just like the journey of Luke Skywalker, is that it's not just trying to figure out the details and how to get along with others and all these sort of things, but they were jokes, and they were riddles, just as this riddle of the hares. And there's something deep inside of us that draws us across water into the unknown, whether it be a lake, river, or beyond the horizon of the big blue. The force that brings us to face our deaths on this water crossing undeniably resides in the deepest well of our being. We know we have this story from Job, who's in the belly of the big fish. Odysseus travels around the ocean, and in the end, Odysseus, at the end of his journey, he takes an overnight. He's kidnapped overnight and sent on the ship. He goes back home. So after 10 years of wandering around the Mediterranean, he seems to get back in one night, as if in a dream. And this journey across water is also found in the dreams of Jung's patients, as well in the myths of Campbell. And you can substitute the body of water for space, or over the rainbow, however you find it. And as we continue down this panel, we find more characters. In this case, we find our hero again. He's draped in a red pellet, as if he's killed a lion of some sort, that wraps around his neck, and he holds a big club.
And perhaps if you put the two together,
you put the dolphin and the man together, as the Paleolithic artist might have seen it, the dolphins are lifting up the red-haired man, which is a fascinating scene. If people had seen this in later times, they would have come up with a story about how the dolphin lifted the man above the water, how he carried him across the seas. And I believe that the ancient Greeks, Romans, and Phoenicians and others, and even the Egyptians, had been to this cave, and that they saw the characters as we're seeing them now, and they created new stories than the Paleolithic artists had envisioned. But they found fundamental characters, the hero on his journey, and empathy of the animal beings. When we go down a little further down the panel, we find the giraffes. And George and I, we went back and forth about whether he was swimming across the Strait of Gibraltar to go into Africa, and whether, what was the elephant really an African elephant? It kind of looked like it, but maybe the artist didn't realize it was supposed to have a hump as a European elephant. There were a few characters we kind of scratched our head about, but then we came to the giraffe. And there's two giraffes. There's a mother giraffe and a juvenile, which wraps its head or its neck around and under the mother's. It's a touching scene, as George pointed out to me. And the artist uses those red discs to create the molded pattern on the neck of the mother giraffe. And again, it's a touching scene of empathy. This is a scene that one can't describe to somebody else to create an image of. Someone had to seen that giraffe. And that image becomes the first archaeological evidence that man had traveled between Europe, and Africa. We have absolutely no other evidence. Everything else is drawn based on DNA. There were no drafts in Europe during that time period. Millions of years earlier there were. And we're going to continue just above the draft is the Barbary macaque. And most people know the Barbary macaque from the James Bond movie, The Living Daylights, with Pierce Brosnan. And in the beginning of the movie, one of the good 00s is taken out by somebody at Gibraltar, and Pierce Brosnan races to go find the killer, and he's driving his car down the hill. The Barbary macaques are jumping on the windshield and bouncing off, and so people, we identify the Barbary macaque as a Gibraltar animal, but in fact the macaque has only been there a few hundred years. It's indigenous to the Atlas Mountains of western North Africa, and George identified the Barbary macaque. Well, you can actually see this Barbary macaque. The Paleolithic artists created the exact same expressions and body movements of a Barbary macaque. The one in the Paleolithic image looks just like one that's sitting in Gibraltar today. And George just said it was definitely Barbary macaque based on that wide rear, which is not common to any other ape. And now here we go to the lion and the lioness, which is actually the first image that I brought up to George, or maybe the second, because George is he's a big cat guy. He still is. And during our conversations and going back in our email conversations, he would disappear off into Afghanistan to look at cheetahs. And a month later, he'd touch back and give me an answer on something that I've been waiting on. In this case, we have two lions. We have the male lion at the top with that big mane. And he's crouched with a long body. And then the female lioness has that blockhead, is coming up to lick his face. Now, what's unique about this is there were lions in Europe at the time, but they didn't have manes, which was entirely a African phenomenon and still is today.
Now, were these like the discs were obviously painted on? Were these drawings carved, or are these completely natural formations that are being interpreted or were interpreted by these shamans and presented to the to the initiates?
Good question. So there were natural formations on the panel itself that the artists then saw, and so maybe they saw the shape of a horse and then enhanced that. They added the red, they added the black, they scraped off layers of organic matter, or kept layers of organic matter to keep the to make it look more like what they wanted to. But that's a really good question. So some people would look at these images, at any cave image, and say, maybe we're just making it up, sort of like the man on the face on Mars. Some people believe face on Mars. And, well, you could look at any cave panel. You can say, okay, I can see this and I can see that. But you're not going to see this array of animals with all the taxonomic details, which is, so this was created by the people. And if we go to the top of the panel, we're going to find a few more animals. We're going to find bears. And the artist used the natural dark part of the top of the panel to form his bears. And you see a mother bear and her two probably yearling, based on the shape of the heads, the conical heads, they're probably yearling cubs. So the artist not only captured a sort of this geography of the animals, but the artist also found the artist utilized the natural features of the rock to create his characters, which goes back to what you were asking. And here's another good example of that as well. We find a striped reptile, and in this case, the artist uses the red discs to create that either molted or striped pattern on the lizard or whatever the reptile is. Like, we can't identify based on the taxonomy of this animal being. But again, the artist used natural features, enhance the rock face, and then put things on top of it. And he uses red throughout the the panel. In this case, we find the oldest female effigy at 34,000 years old, and she has braided red hair. If you remember earlier, the man with the big club had red hair as well. And so there's some sort of tradition, whether it be natural red hair or putting red into people's hair for some symbolic value. And she's really interesting because you can look at her facial expressions. You can learn a lot about her. She's kind of grimacing. She's a little bit worried, perhaps. You can see that she's young because she has a full chin, and she has these strong chin and these full, her breasts are full, and she has strong cheekbones. And you can see kind of this little worried look about her, which may be telling us as what's going on in the story. We have this man who swims across the body of water, and he's encountering different animal beings. And there's this woman who's has this worried look. So perhaps that's something that's part of the story. And she is the oldest female that we have by about 10,000 years.
Now, obviously, these paintings would have been done by more of an adept or a shaman within the tribe, and during that time, is it possible, or is there any indication that? And again, I'm going to use the Den of Lore language, that these people were high as effing kites on some type of cycloben or some other type of plant that may have provided more of a abstract style to the art?
Well, I'm not sure if there's actually an abstract style as people find with the artists in the Amazon, because we're seeing, in fact, the next slide is going to answer your question, because we're seeing a little more detail than people find in through hallucinogenic substances. And the next slide is really the one that answers that question. So when people do these psychedelic drugs, and they paint or they draw or they sing what they see, okay, and it's something that's their reality in that moment, but it's not a reality of all time. It's their own personal experience. And we're gonna go to the next slide, which really tells us. Which kind of puts this part of the story together, okay? And we're going to let you just dwell on it a moment, and I'm going to kind of read these off as we go. So we're going to learn now that this was not a hallucinogenic experience, and this was not these are not at random. If we start, we're going to go to the dark image to the top right, and A is the constellation Hercules. Below Hercules is B, which is Aegea, the eagle. C is Pegasus, the horse. E is Pisces, which we found is the dolphin. F is Cetus, the sea monster, which became the seal. G is Perseus, which became the body of the elephant. Going down to the below frame, we have H, which is Aegea, which is Aruga, which is the ear and the head of the elephant. I is Taurus, which looks like the trunk of the elephant. J is Lynx, which is either the body of the lynx that we saw, or it becomes the trunk of the elephant from a kind of a 90-degree perspective. K is Ursa Major, and you can kind of look at Ursa Major, the constellation. The area where you have that K looks like the mother bear, and the two conical shapes looks like the shapes of the two juvenile cubs. L becomes Leo, the lion. M is Gemini, which is either that cylindrical shape of the lioness, or the two eyes of the Barbary macaw. They're in the same place. And then N is Orion. And in the night sky at that time, Hercules was on the north end, and Orion was on the south. And on this end we saw Orion, we also found the Barbary macaw. We found the lion, the lioness, and we found the giraffe. So that's to the south. And we found the Iberian lynx to the north, where we found the cosmic man, as we found the eagle and the Brzezinski horse, which is indigenous to Eurasia. And so the Paleolithic artist had a scheme to this. He's telling a story that's not just on land of a journey, but it's a story that's in the night sky, that travels through the seasons. And the initiate apprentice, I believe, took this journey. He took this journey to Western North Africa, and as he traveled, he saw these different animals as he moved along. And these animals told him a lot about himself. And he learned about the nurturing giraffe and the protective giraffe with the juvenile, and how the Iberian lynx, the kitten nuzzles up to the cat's ruff under the chin. So the apprentice learned about himself, all these experiences. And you kind of think about the first Star Wars movie. Luke goes into that bar, and I can't remember the bar, and there's all these like wild creatures, and it's the first time we see something like that in the movies, and they're playing fun music, but they're really wacky. Well, that's the same thing that this Paleolithic apprentice would have had as he traveled into Western North Africa. He would have seen this wide range of animals that he'd never seen before, but he also would have seen them in the night sky. And in the Hermetic tradition, so above, so below, this is exactly what's going on. And we kind of do this today. The United States is, of course, the land of the eagle, the free and the brave. Russia is the bear. And you can go around each state, you can find some sort of animal. And these are typically animals that are indigenous to that place. And in the Paleolithic mind, they just didn't see them on land and in the myths. They saw them in the night skies. And we're gonna do one more slide, then we're gonna pop off slides for a minute and just kind of chat and catch up on what we're doing. And in this slide, I write that myths are passed through the seasons of the night sky as constellations and stars, projecting man's psyche into the cosmos. Characters that are light years from Earth, but still within the grasp of the human imagination. So we're going to take a break now from the slides, and Bernie's going to jump in. And I'm sure the slides were more interesting than me, but this might be a good time to just chat.
All right, well, I'm just going to try and see if I can bring this on here. There we go, split screen. Okay, so Bernie, I have to say first two things, and like when you and I were discussing the book beforehand, you said, okay, well, let's see if we can get Alex in here. And I know Alex, it's wintertime, and with he's extremely busy. I know that you wanted to make sure that he would be able to take the journey, so I said, okay, well, I'm going to stop reading the book because I want to make sure that at least you got somebody going in fresh. Because you said the full impact happens when you actually go through the journey with you. The first thing I have to say is, holy crap. And the second one, there is still that rational questioning part of my mind that has to say, okay, well, and I'm also thinking from the skeptic's standpoint, because you have to nowadays.
Sure.
What really makes it apparent that these drawings were there? Is it possible that this is not some type of patternicity or take a shot, ladies and gentlemen, apophenia, trying to see order and patterns in everyday objects where there may not be any that are apparent. How did you come to the realization that these shapes were there, and what was the process that you had started?
So I was writing a book. I'd written a previous book, Biological Time, which is chronobiology, and I was studying how plants and animals time themselves. And I came across the concept of solar lunar timing in migrations. I looked back into the Paleolithic record in the cave at Lascaux, and I saw that there were images of animals that were seasonal depictions that had marks under them, and typically dots. And I correlated some of those markings to the seasonality of the animals. And there was one image that had it's a big megaloceros, which is sort of like a huge elk. It's bigger than an elk, bigger rack than an elk, and it has these huge antlers, and it's blowing the stream of mist out that you can see in the image, and under it with 13 marks, and if you count 13 from the first new moon, count 13, you come to the full moon, which is when the animals were coming together to rut, which is what I showed empirically in biological time. Well, I put that aside about 12 years ago, and now that is all pretty much mainstream. But when I did it, I was out there, and I started this other book, and I was going to just continue on that same path and just include more caves, and I recognized a few more things about the Lascaux images. And then I said to myself, maybe I need to look further back in time, and that's about the same time that the El Castillo gallery, the panel of hands with that red dot dated to 40K was found. And I looked through the cave and I saw that panel with these 80 or so discs, the gallery of discs, 10 meters across. It's huge, and the official account was that there's only red discs. But in the Paleolithic record, the most common character is the horse, and it's typically a pregnant mare, as we ultimately found with this gallery of discs. And I said to myself, in that 10 meters, there's got to be more than just these discs, because it's a huge flat panel. So I started looking for the horse. Well, I didn't find the horse until 2.5 years later. I found the elephant right away. Within minutes, I saw the elephant. I saw the teacher and the apprentice. 10 minutes later, I saw the lion shortly after that. Within a few hours, I saw maybe a dozen characters. So the reason, how did I see this when other people didn't, is that I wasn't captivated or hypnotized by these red discs. I asked the question, could there be more in it? Okay. Now this is so there's nobody smarter or less smart than anybody else, and this goes back to basic instinct. Nicholas Tinbergen won a Nobel Prize for his book, The Study of Instinct, and he had this. How he came to this concept of the red was he had these sticklebacks, 3-spined sticklebacks, so it's kind of a prey fish, and they're sitting in a fish tank by his window, and every time a red delivery truck came by, the fish went into a defensive posture. And since the sticklebacks are brainstem dominated, they don't have cognitive thinking as we do, Tinbergen suggested that it's a basic instinct. And we've now, Madison Avenue, of course, have gone on to use that concept. If you drive down any highway, you're going to see stop signs. We don't have green and blue stop signs because they blend into our green and blue world. You look at McDonald's and DQ and Burger King, they've got red in them because it stops us. It gets our attention. And it's well known in the world of marketing, and it's based on the work of Tinbergen. But Tinbergen didn't discover that concept. The Paleolithic artist did, and he does this in other caves too. They do these in other caves. And what they were doing was they were testing the apprentice. Could they see the forest through the trees? Or in this case, could you see the savanna through the red discs? And if you can't see the multiple perspectives, just as the Tuareg riddle of how many hairs does a man have, how could you spiritually lead, intellectually lead? How could you be the go-to guru in the clan?
Now, one question that I'm getting in the chat room is, as you do know, we tend to take the Socratic method here when it comes to conversation and presentations, and I believe this one is actually coming from Dean, who's asking about the stick men with dots under each arm in all of the caves around the world. New theory is stating that they represent plasmatic events from the sun.
I can't speak to that.
Okay.
And there's all cave images are not based on the same formula. This gallery disc has a theme of, we see this hero's journey is in the night sky. All cave images don't have this sky and terrestrial connection. So there's no generic answer to any of it. Now here's an interesting one, because this has been done again. You know the story, well, of course, we've seen Close Encounters. And in Close Encounters, they have this dream of the mountain. And the Richard Dreyfuss character builds up the archetypal character of a mountain, which is Devil's Tower in the Black Hills. I believe that Steven Spielberg studied the psychology of people to come up with that concept. But he also correlated it to the practices of the Lakota Sioux. The Lakota Sioux, from the spring until the summer solstice, traveled around the Black Hills, and they followed the constellations. And the final constellation that they they stopped at as it came on first sight in the sun. And the final site that they stopped at was what we call Devil's Tower, which was their Bear Lodge, which is the constellation of Gemini.
Okay? Holy crap!
So as we take the same journey that the Paleolithic artist took. At the end of it, in the southern end, he comes to the Barbary macaw, the lioness, which is Gemini, and the constellations, and that's a mid-summertime time period, which ties into the life history strategies of these animals and their time periods. They're all in June, as the Lakota Sioux did in their ceremony that at the summer solstice. And their ceremony was the Sundance, where they celebrated life, suffering, and what you can find through that suffering, which is to reach into the great mystery.
Now
that's pretty heavy.
you see this red curtain back here. That's because my brain's been blown out the back of my head. Now, how does this relate to the earlier cultures that were within that area? How did this? I'm going to say, how much is known about the tradition of teaching initiates this way? Is this something that we have any idea of? Is there any artifacts? Or, well, obviously they didn't have any writing at the time, but is this more of a hypothesis that's seeming to be looked at or understood by sociologists and archaeologists more? Or is this more of a fringe theory that people are dismissing?
Well, I've just put this thing back almost 30,000 years and what we've previously recognized. Okay, partly so. In the Lascaux cave, there was work which is about 17,000 years ago. A French astronomer, Chantal, who's a friend of mine, did work, and she showed that in the hall of the bulls, which are all male animal beings, that they correlated to the stars as the artist the Paleolithic artist would have seen at the time. Kind of goes around in a circle, and she made a documentary into that. You can Google that, Chantal's work online. So she actually basically splattered stars and found how they correlated with the animal beings. This is a little more exact. In this case, we have the same animal beings that the Greeks used for the same constellations at the same time of year, and geographically they all align. So is this a fringe theory? I think everything is a fringe theory when it first comes out, even among academics. So is it being taken seriously? I have a presentation on Tuesday at a major university. It'll be translated or interpreted into multiple languages, sent around the world. I'll tell you in 2 months.
Well, what happened? Oh, wow. Okay. Can you speak to that a little more?
Well, it'll be sent out on Tuesday. We'll put it on YouTube and such. Okay. And it'll be put into multiple languages. It'll be French, Spanish, and Amazon, as well as English.
Oh, well, I was hoping to see if I can get that one out of you. I guess I couldn't.
No, well, I don't want anybody to change their minds. Any guest complaint or anything like that.
Oh well,
but I could, I've had these images posted on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. I can see who's liking, sharing, loving, and all that sort of stuff. And the people that are liking and retweeting, they're major players in this world of archaeology. Mm-hmm. They can see the elephant in the room. They can see the cosmic man and and so on. It's not that we just didn't look. And honestly, I didn't look either. I had seen that gallery of this image with the dot streaming across. Now it's in trance or hypnotized by the red. So this is not. I kind of came across it by a fluke. I reasoned that it would be there, and then I took the journey further, and I found the same phenomenon in other caves. That's not prepared on this slide presentation. It's in the book. We can do it maybe a part 2 sometime. But this is not the only cave that has this system or this schematic of images. No, it repeats itself.
What other caves out there have this theme of going to say altered or modified natural formations that tell a multiple animal story?
Well, we're gonna. That leads us. We're about 10 slides away from that. So we're going to continue down that path in a place you have not been in the book. You want to go down a little bit now?
I'm ready to go down the rabbit hole.
Okay,
just call me Alice.
Because you really are down a rabbit hole now. You're questioning yourself. You're questioning the primary literature. But at the same time, you're questioning that can Paleolithic man 34,000 years ago have been in some ways smarter than we are today?
That I'm not questioning. I'm more questioning my own. Is that really there? Am I seeing what I'm actually seeing? Is it real? And it's like one of you remember. Well, you're old enough to be able to remember. I know some of our viewers are not old enough to remember. Do you remember those like real 3D images where it's like just a 3D geometric pattern? You hold it to your face and you kind of like move it away, and then all of a sudden, it's a pony or it's a ball.
But it was designed
in a box.
Those were designed.
Well, those were also designed, but
they were designed. Yeah.
It's that same idea of, am I actually seeing this? Is there a rational explanation? I'm trying to, I can see it, and I can see the images that you're presenting, and my brain is questioning whether they're actually there or whether it's just a trick of the eye. And it draws me in. It makes me more interested, which is why I'm kind of freaking out a little bit to a certain extent, because it's like, okay, I'm good. Let's have started that journey, and let's go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and as I started this presentation out, I said this is a psychological journey. And what also happens is your mind kind of bends a little bit as you work in these images, and that you have to find this. Your mind finds a separation between the red discs and what's behind it, and to see at some point as you watch these images, you're going to be able to see multiple images at the same time, and as you step away from it, and your perspective in life is going to change as well. So you took that vape, and we're gonna.
Well, before you go on, and one thing I know that there was one question regarding the giraffe, and the interesting part is I've done design and art for a number of years since I was a kid, and it's like I can actually see the giraffe shape, and I can actually see the shading of underneath the flank, and behind the front leg. I'm like, okay, that. Like, to me, it makes sense. To me, I can actually see the image that's being presented, even when it's not outlined to me or shown to me, from what you're actually demonstrating. So I'm starting to get that mode in my head.
Well, the giraffe's actually a good one, because I saw the head of the giraffe within the first few hours of looking at that panel. I didn't recognize it as a giraffe until a year later, because I couldn't believe that you could have an image of a giraffe in Europe. So I recognized it the head of some sort of a deer, but to actually figure out it was a giraffe was quite some time later. So I'm gonna duck out for a minute again, and we're gonna resume our presentation on the journey. Okay, we have a slide here, the Saharan Tuareg, and on this journey by land and sea and throughout the night sky, we've traveled into the western North Africa, and where we can look at the ancient peoples of the region. One is the Tuareg, who currently live in the Greater Sahara region, and who give us the riddle of how many hairs does a man have. The Tuareg are Muslims of the Maliki sect, loosely following basic requirements of Islam, while still believing in animism and other pre-Islamic traditions. And animism is the belief that animals are beings, are actual conscious beings, that the rivers are a spirit, as well as that the clouds speak to you, and that the mountains are spirits as well. And there's the Tuareg are known for the males wear a blue veil, whereas the women do not, and the male's veil is called a talgamust. And the male talgamust looks very much like the mask of the cosmic man. You can see how the shading works between the two. So is the cosmic man wearing a talgamust or some sort of a robe? I can't say. Or some sort of veil? I can't say that. But darn, these two look a lot alike. And if they had some sort of clothing, in extreme temperatures, one would have thought that they wrapped it around their face to stay warm. And if you take a 23andMe DNA test and you come from background of the United Kingdom, it's going to pop up Tuareg all over it. And the Tuareg of Sahara are genetically linked about 8,000 years ago, and an equal number of miles today from the indigenous Sami or Lap reindeer herders of Finland, and much farther away in miles to the Yakut of Siberia. To say that they're linked means that there was a common ancestor who lived during this period. But they were Tuareg. That's the one we can find, but that is not the oldest. And these people are connected through DNA to people in Scotland to about 5,600 years ago. So Tuareg have done a lot of traveling around. And there were multiple exchanges between the people of West North Africa and Spain, questioning, who came first. Where did this H1 DNA come from? Did it come from West North Africa, or did it come from the Iberian Peninsula? The oldest Homo sapiens have been found at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, which dates to 300,000 years ago. When I first started working on this project, the Jebel Irhoud work didn't come out to just about a year ago. And I had basically figured out the whole thing without knowing the Jebel Irhoud data. And in modern alternative archaeology, alternative history, as well in history itself, people are asking that question, well, what happened 12,000 years ago? There was a dispersal. Well, 12,000 years ago is also the end of cave art in Europe. And people don't talk about that. But so it ends in Europe, and the people seem to just have disappeared. Well, the next slide might tell us where some of these people went. African rock art starts 12,000 years ago. It doesn't exist before then. There were people there, but they didn't have this rock art. Mm-hmm. And art is something that's within us, but it's also a tradition or technique that we carry among us. And the oldest is the Bobalis period, which is abolishes something like a cow. It's a bull. And as you go through the periods and the cultures, you ultimately come up to the camel, which is the present period. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some of the Western North African rock art, and these are not by periods, but they're by regions or current countries. And these are all current countries where the Tuareg are heavily populated. And in this one we have an elephant in Morocco. And what's interesting about this one is that the shape of the elephant, if you look at the 4 feet in the bottom, actually look like fingers. And you could twist your thumb to make that trunk of the elephant. And the shape suggests kind of a juvenile elephant. Fascinating image. And the next one in Morocco is of a rhinoceros. And again, if you look at how the artist does the legs, they look like legs, but they also look like your fingers. And he might have had some sort of hand gesture, or these might be some sort of that rock art may be some description of a hand gesture, which is what I proposed in the book. And if we continue down, we go around Africa, in a different part of Morocco, we have some sort of gazelle, and it's stylish. These images are absolutely phenomenal. They're in par what we find in Paleolithic Europe. These people were tremendous artists. And as we continue, we go to Libya. In Libya, we find a crocodile. And we have to remember that prior to 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, the Sahara had huge lakes and rivers. It wasn't the desert that we see today. And so these artists are telling us of a different time and place. And one of the ways that the archaeologists date the animals is by what animals could have been present during those periods. And here we are now in Algeria. We have a hippopotamus. So kind of put this into perspective. You can imagine a hippopotamus walking around the Sahara today. It just blows your mind. The Sahara is the largest, it's a tremendous area, but it's still the largest art gallery in the world. Go to Algeria, and these are herders, and this is a much earlier time period. So this is not going back 12,000 years ago, probably within the last 4 or 5,000 years. But again, we see absolutely beautiful images that people made through artistic talent and a feeling for nature. And we go to Niger, as people in Niger say it, and we see this huge life-size giraffe. And in the gallery of discs, that giraffe, it's 10 meters across. The mother giraffe is life-size. We kind of put that into perspective. Some of the other animals, like the lynx, are huge. in the story, but in fact they are on that panel. But the giraffe itself is life size.
Wow.
Yeah, and this one in Niger as well. So there's a tradition that's carried on that I believe from Europe into Western North Africa, and continuing to Nigeria, we see more giraffes and perhaps an elephant. There's these people in the mind of the animist. The animals are just not something that they hunted. They're beings that they cohabitated with, and in the tradition of both the Tuareg in the Sahara as well as hunter-gatherers in North America, they tell stories of the North Americans, the beaver chatting with the rabbit, and the coyote telling the elk what to do, and that the coyote is the trickster, and the Alaskan tradition it's the raven or some sort of an eagle. So these animals are the metaphorical characters that people are using in the stories. So in the Gallery of Discs, we find all those animals, but they're metaphors for a geography of the region, and I would suggest that they're all also metaphors as part of some sort of story that was encountered by the apprentice on his travels. And continuing to Niger, we find more giraffes and other animals. And these are phenomenal pieces of art that are they're telling about who we are and where we come from. But we can see common themes of what we found in the Gallery of Discs. Again, Niger, this is more recent. I can't tell you what these people are, but they are the impression of what what people in Niger at that time felt. In Niger, the Tuareg do not do psychedelic hallucinogenic drugs. They go into a trance stance to find their visions, in the same way that Native Americans did in times past. The most common method of achieving a alternate state of consciousness is through a trance dance, and secondly, it's through some sort of pain. So this concept that you can't make art unless you're doing drugs is kind of absurd. And this is how I look at it. You've got young kids, and someday your kid's might come home from school and they have a D in a math test, or maybe not your kid, maybe a C, right? And perhaps the kid says to you, I couldn't do this math test. The teacher must have been drugs when they made the test, and it just can't be done. Do you tell your kid, well, maybe you need to explore the drugs, or let's try to figure out how we can do the math? So there's an answer for you, Chris, as a new dad.
Oh, well, yeah, that's one aspect of it.
Okay.
Although she's quite fond of flute, classical flute music, Mozart specifically.
Yeah, and so we go to there can be answers outside of drugs, and now that there's a method, I'm exploring a methodology to look at the cave images as not a hallucinogenic vision, but a story that we've been telling forever, and a story that we still tell today, that the Greeks carried on. And we can return back to this Gallery of Discs and ask ourselves, how might the artists have found their craft? And this answer goes into another question that you would ask is, how did it first come about? Well, I'm not the first one to ask that question, and neither are you, and perhaps some of the audience. Picasso asked where it all came from. And a quote from Picasso is, "It occurred to man to create his own images. It's because he discovered them in the world around him, almost formed, already within his grasp. He saw them in a bone, in the irregular surface of cavern walls, in a piece of wood. One form might suggest a woman, another a bison." So this is Picasso, okay? And he's trying to sort out, where does art first come from? And how does it continue on? And so he says that man first saw these things in the rocks. He saw something that looked like the shape of a horse, another that looked like the butt of a deer, and he built on that. And he saw them in the clouds as well. He saw them in the breeze. He saw them in the sticks that fell into
and floated down a river. He saw these shapes in the natural world, and then he improved upon them. And it's a natural thing. Now, we're going to go back to Picasso. Picasso's first work of art, of modern art, I should say, was in 1907, which was Les Dames d'Avignon. And this image is the pivotal moment that creates modern art. There's no modern art before this. And what created it was those two masks that Picasso put on the women. Well, we can find the origin of those two masks at the Altamira Cave. And the Altamira Cave had been discovered just before Picasso a few years before Picasso had made this image. And Picasso was said to have gone to the cave. And he came out of it and said no one, because people said it was a fraud, that modern artists had made this. Picasso came out and said none of us could have made anything like this. Well, Picasso, he saw the metaphors and the characters, and these two, what is called the chamber of the bulls, the chamber of the horses in the Altamira Cave. And he takes those two masks and he puts them onto the women in Les Dames d'Avignon. And he takes the woman that's standing with the mask becomes the lead mare, as he saw the metaphor of the image in the Altamira Cave, this Paleolithic image. So in some ways, we're reliving our past through the metaphors that had been seen before us, these metaphors that are somehow within us. And this is actually my interpretation of this is the first time this has come out. I don't believe I'm the first person that's seen this, but the common story out there, if you Google it online, is that Picasso had his friend stole a mask from a museum, brought it home. Picasso then used it to make these masks, and then his friend returned it to the museum. Well, I can tell you what, I believe it was the Louvre. If someone had found a mask, if that mask still existed, it would be sitting right next to Les Dames d'Avignon in MoMA to show that this was the origin of modern art. But no one actually ever found the masks. Other people have said that, well, maybe he found it in African art. Well, this image, comparing the Altamira image to Les Dames d'Avignon, shows that these are exactly the same masks. And your viewer can look at them later more closely and kind of, the details are extraordinary. But Picasso was borrowing the metaphor. He wasn't stealing art. And he recognized that there are commonalities between people of the past and the future. And in this case, he finds the lead mare. And we're going to look at another Picasso, Picasso's exploration, and this one is in the main horse in Guernica, the mare in Guernica. And we look to your viewers' right, we find the same horse in Grotte de Père non Père. And in the Guernica, when Picasso made Guernica, was creating Guernica, he has this thing almost done, and he has a different horse. Then he disappears for a long weekend. No one knows where he goes. It's a mysterious weekend. He's got a deadline to get this into the exposition. But he just disappears. Some people says he went to one girlfriend, one says he went to his mistress, and another says he went to his wife. And so Picasso had a lot of women in his life. But I think that Picasso went to Grotte de Père non Père and he found that horse. And he puts it into his image. And he calls this horse the horse represents Spain. And there are many other characters in Guernica that represent animal beings. There's the metaphors of the animal beings as well. We're going to take another look at another Picasso work, which is the curtain design for a play. In this case, he has this huge avianoid. So think back to the cosmic man in the Gallery of Discs. We have the man behind the mask, and we saw his chin a little bit underneath. Well, Picasso in this case, he has this Birdman with these kind of awkward legs and this big chest and these huge strong arms, and is carrying a monitor. And in the Paleolithic version, it's actually a bearded vulture, and there's a man. This headdress is actually sitting on top of a human being. So Picasso borrows this one. He borrows the metaphor and he incorporates it into his work. And people had long asked Picasso, where did you get your inspiration for this? And he said, I'm not going to tell you because this is my secret. Picasso died a multi-millionaire, which his heirs have inherited, and he's a worldwide phenomenon. And Picasso had the vision
to see within the Paleolithic mind, and that it was our own, and carry those metaphors to the modern times. Now, I'm going to tell you that I'm not the first one. This is a very awkward image, and to the viewer's right, you're seeing the image we just showed with the Birdman. You can see the features. There's nothing marked from my side, and to the left, what we see is the official archaeological historical version of that panel, and this was done by the Abbé Brulé, known as the father of prehistory. And most of the images that we have that are drawn in the Paleolithic art books are the records of this individual, the Abbé, who died in 61. And he had spent countless hours in caves, and he is the man, okay? He is a historian. He is the one we go to for the information. And you can compare his view of the Agnus Dei panel with the one to the viewer's right, the actual panel. And you kind of misses that Birdman's head, doesn't he? You see the difference, Chris?
Well, I can, but I can still see in the left image. I could still see the head and the arcing at the top. I could see the legs at the bottom. I could still see the loop in between the two. If you go the lower left-hand corner of the right image compared to the lower left-hand corner of the left image, those are still congruent. You still have that overarching line in the midway to the left that goes from kind of like curves up from the bottom all the way to the middle. And you do still see the sweeping lines. So yeah, I could take a look at these two now. I'm a graphic designer.
Sure.
I've been, like as I said before, I've been doing this type of thing and this type of doodling my entire life. And I could very easily see that there are too many things within the two images for it to not have been inspired by it. It would be very uncanny for that many prominent lines and main lines within the design to have it be just a fluke. It's
exactly
very, very small chance.
So he was hiding something. So the Abbé's hypothesis was that the Paleolithic caves are all hunting magic, and there's only one other cave, Lascaux, the so-called chamber of the dead man, which is a fairly common one. 17,000 years ago, you've seen that one, the shaft of the dead man, that has a Birdman. The Abbé didn't want a theme of Birdmen, because when you ask where does the Birdman come from, and where is the Birdman today, and of course that the Birdman becomes the angel. The Birdman becomes this archetypal symbol, this character that is carried throughout time. You can look at Göbekli Tepe, you can look at all the major sites, you can look at Horus and Egyptians, you can look at native indigenous people around the world. They dress up as Birdmen. It's in our art everywhere. And my suggestion is that the origin of that goes deep into the Paleolithic, and that the Abbé hid it because he didn't want this concept of a religion, of a faith, that these are hunters and gatherers. These were not people that had a systemized religion. And I believe that the Abbé was actually hiding that. And so when we look at history, we have to consider that everything people tell us, and everything that we read in the book, and everything that is peer-reviewed, and everything that is referenced and sourced, and all these sort of things, it doesn't mean it's true. It means that was one person's perspective. And we go back to the same concept of how many hairs does a man have? There can be multiple perspectives. And in the Abbé's view, his perspective, based on his reality, based on his religion, was that there were no birdmen here, there were no angels, that was a modern phenomenon that came out of Mesopotamia in Abrahamic times. And so you had your question, too, of how this all came about. And as I write in this slide, we individually project our psyche into the cosmos, in all the animal beings and geological and meteorological foundations that are encountered. When we look into the skies, we see bunnies and we see elephants, and we see them twist 90 degrees. We turn our heads, and it appears that they have movements. Man projects his psyche into the cosmos. We create angels. We create all these beings. It doesn't mean that they're there. It's something that comes from within ourselves that's carried on through these archetypes that we recognize. When we see the archetype, they're encountered, the myth emerges, the story is told. We see that woman in distress in the Gallery of Discs with the raised cheeks and the grimacing face, and we recognize that she's not a happy camper. We can see the tenderness between the young giraffe wrapping around the mother, we recognize that even though they're animal beings, we don't say that's just some wild thing that's going on. We see a protective mode. We have that empathy. And so we're seeing multiple perspectives, and Picasso was brilliant because he could see those multiple perspectives. He could see the metaphors of these animals, which now brings us back to the question, this forever question of how many hairs does a man have? And your few of your viewers are, they're raking through their hair if they still have it. They're looking around. They're thinking, is it an average, or is it how many I have, and so on. Well, the answer to the question of the Tuareg riddle is one dark and the other light to reflect the maturation of man. In that same answer, we can see other possibilities that can be found by considering multiple perspectives. And this entire presentation today has been about seeing multiple perspectives, about looking beyond what we first are inclined to do. So how does the thinker become the feeler? How does the counter start, considering that there's empathy within the animals? How do we do all these? How can we wrap our heads around all these sorts of things and these ideas? It's about thinking out of the box. And I believe that the journey of the apprentice was not just to understand the constellations, to understand all the animals, and to navigate that emotional and terrestrial landscape to go to Africa and back again. But I also think that it was how to become a more whole person, to become a better spiritual leader. And these people lived for not individuals, but remember these cultures lived for tens of thousands of years. We're struggling with hundreds of years in our current time, and really thousands of years since ancient Mesopotamia. And these people had a coherent ideology, a spiritual traditions that has continued in some parts of the world until today. And I believe that this is really relevant in our modern time. That if we carry all these archetypes within us, aren't we all the same people? Whether someone calls an angel, another person calls it a shaman, birdman, another person calls it an Anuki or a cosmonaut. We're finding these same archetypal characters within us because we come from the same place. And Jung said that we carry these symbols in our collective unconscious. They're inherently within us. And as such, we repeat history, we repeat the same stories because they tell us who we are and help us to express who we are. So our identity, as the slide says, is only an illusion created by those who have an alternative version of our origins. So there's another good place to stop, and you could ponder for a moment and give me your,
okay, well,
do a check-in. Are you still there, Chris? Are you still breathing?
Okay, well, it's starting to dawn on me because I'm going on this journey with you here, and let me just, I got the cool graphics back on. These images, at least from what you're telling me, this isn't just about prehistory, and this isn't just about ancient lost civilizations, and this isn't just about, some pretty pictures on a wall somewhere. It's the tribe helping to develop people from, from undeveloped, youthful minds who don't necessarily understand the world, to helping them using the imagery of animals to help develop that person into a more complete person. And at least that's kind of what I'm getting from this. It's like that person saying, okay, well, here are the different aspects of the designs, and it makes people think, it makes people try and look at themselves as individuals. And, even for myself, I'm looking at this and I'm realizing how deep that rabbit hole goes. It's like
it's deep. It's real deep.
It's antediluvian psychology essentially, or like it's like when you're in high school, you've got the guidance counselor. Basically, the shaman was acting as like the school guidance counselor at that point to try and teach people more about the world and more about themselves, so that they're not complete assholes, and they're not just that there's more to the world than just themselves. It's more than just you. There are other beings in this world that deserve your consideration and regard. And You were talking about archetypes and how that at the end of the day we can, how many hairs are on a man's head. And you said, well, okay, well that's the question. Our den mother, which is a very apropos name, if you'd like to say that, considering there is a lion figure within the larger image, as you pointed out. Her answer was all of them.
That's good. I like that.
And
so it's an alternative perspective. It's not, trying to count the hairs or average 10 people or whatever it is. That's good.
So, I came into this with the surface expectation of, okay, well, we're gonna learn how this shit connected to the Sphinx, and we're gonna talk maybe about Atlantis, and it's like, no, this is so much deeper. And it's like, I'm actually kind of excited here. I'm like, to the people who cut out early from this presentation, you guys missed out.
Mm-hmm. We're going to hit some big stuff soon. We're going to start again. Now, remember the second Star Wars movie, The Empire Strikes Back, Luke is about to enter the cave. And Yoda says to him, the only thing you bring into the cave is yourself. Okay? And Yoda is Carl Jung. George Lucas borrows the work from Joseph Campbell, who borrows the work from Carl Jung. And he built these archetypal scenes, the cave that he goes into. And Luke goes into the cave, and he starts battling with Darth Vader. And ultimately, he lobs off his head. And in the helmet, he sees his own face. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so we're finding these same sort of archetypal characters going deep into the cave. I did a podcast with Bernard Alvarez, who had shamanic training. And he said to me that when he went on his vision quest, he couldn't reach that place. And his shamanic teacher said to him, look deep into a hole. Look deep into a dark hole. And in that dark hole, you'll find yourself. Just as Jung did when he walked through the hallway finally into the cave. And as Luke Skywalker did as he went into the that cave. And the story, of course, of Luke Skywalker is about George Lucas. Darth Vader is his father, and he's Lucas is struggling with his father about what will be his path in life. And his father wants him to have a 9-to-5 job, work for a big corporation, all that sort of stuff. But Lucas wants to travel the stars. He wants to tell this grand myth, this story. And that's what Star Wars is about. It's the relationships in George Lucas's life that he's portraying through these characters that we see. And it's a lot more fun to hear the story of Luke Skywalker than it is of a battle between Lucas and his father. And I believe that we've been telling these stories for tens of thousands of years because they tell us or they teach us about ourselves. And there's so many stories like that. Of course, Frodo in Lord of the Rings, his nemesis is Gollum. But if he kills who wants to kill him, but if he kills Gollum, he becomes Gollum, and that's why he can't do it. He can't give him the ring, but he can't kill him either. And in the end, Gollum, of course everybody's seen the movie by this time, Gollum, in his own greed, falls into the fire at the mountain, at the cosmic mountain. And so you ready to go on for more slides, or you're gonna you want to ponder another moment or two?
Let me just center
Take a
myself.
breath, yeah.
Well, let me just prepare myself to go back into the cave for once more into the breach, as they say.
Well, we're this is only the beginning of the journey. Time's about to end for us, probably about 15 minutes or so. Well, but we're really in this early part of the journey, and we need to do another show.
Well, we'll go through the next slide, and again, we'll make it to the end on this one.
Okay.
Double click on that. We'll go back to full screen.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the cave. We saw those lions. We saw the lioness, and I'm going to duck out here so people aren't distracted. In here, we see the lioness reaching up to the lion. He's at the top of the panel, as one would expect a lion to be, and he's crouched there. You can see his two paws sticking out. And you can see his rear leg kind of horizontal along that line. We're going to step over to another large carnivore, which runs on that image. And this is a mythical animal. This animal does not exist. Kind of looks like a cheetah, but there's a cheetah in this image that's very exact, has distinct tear marks that this animal doesn't have. But it's a spotted animal. And he has an awkward-looking face. So when I first saw this one, I stared at it, I looked at it, I said, I've seen this animal before. And it's not in the record of big cats for sure. And so I compared it to a big cat that we do know. And of course, the Giza Sphinx. They're identical. And the difference is that the large carnivore in this image is sort of like sitting up. But the large carnivore, the Giza Sphinx, is a combination between the sitting up large carnivore and that crouching lying that we saw. They're in the same place. So the Egyptians had seen this thing. And if you look at it has the nemes that runs behind the head. It has that distinctive or that teardrop at the forehead. Has that strong jaw. And the Egyptians had seen this. Now, people have to read the book to find out where this comes from, where the artist was inspired by. But the Egyptians were inspired by this image of this Sphinx. And I believe they had been there, as were the Greeks. And that this was an original time for them. They didn't really know how far back in time it was. They could take some guesses. They knew it was more than 30,000, I'm sure. And John Anthony West says that, based on the work he's done and the research, that the first time of the ancient Egyptians was about 35,000 years ago. Well, this suggests that John Anthony West was right. That Zep Tepi, that first time of the ancient Egyptians that they were drawing from, was from the Paleolithic, and it's very deep back in time. And I've never met John Anthony West. I've never communicated with him, but we sent him some images, and I hope that he's in the frame of mind that he can, mentally explore these and perhaps find what he was looking for his whole life. But it's I've done a lot of podcasts. This is the first one I pulled out the Sphinx, or the origin of the Sphinx, because I'm not sensationalizing the Sphinx as finding the answer to everything. I believe that the story of the hero's journey, and that the earth and sky are one, and that this apprentice goes into the cave to find himself, and to set his own people, society free, is a much greater story than finding a Sphinx finding the original Sphinx in the cave. I believe that the Sphinx story is going to end, isn't going to last very long, whereas that there were intelligent people in a very distant past, perhaps people just as intelligent, and certainly, in the words of Picasso, more creative than us, artistically creative, and that we borrowed from these people from the past, as Picasso redid in his modern art, Cubism, which became the modern art of our own time. And I'm going to pop back to one last slide, which is of course, the cover of the book. And there's lots of other, if you don't want to buy the book, it's an ebook all over the place. But you can find the images in other places to explore. Of course, you can rewind this image, this video. But beforeorion.com, Twitter, Bernie Taylor OR, or so it's hashtag Before Orion. I'm on Facebook. It's Before Orion, and I've put out many more images than I've shown in this presentation. I hadn't put out the Sphinx one, but you can, the viewer can, explore the images. They can look at them. They can ask their kids and ask their partners, and what do you see? And maybe show them first the gallery of discs without the elephant and without the cosmic man and the horse and so on, and so the people can take their own journey of testing themselves to see if they can see beyond one reality, that there can be more answers to how many hairs does a man have than trying to average, 10 people in a room. And I'm now going to duck back onto the back onto the screen. So how did the video work for you, Chris? Did you like that?
The video was fantastic, and when we first did the test on the video, I'm like, okay, well, you just had your computer, fixed up, and there was a little. I wasn't sure exactly how things would have worked, but it was very, very smooth. the only thing is that with the Sphinx, it is possible that that image was carved after, or I should say, I'm not sure how that image would have related, because it has been proven to a certain extent using, using forensic techniques that the head was carved afterwards. That it was very likely the head of a lion. Some people are theorizing that it may have actually been a statue to Anubis, and it was actually a dog shape, although, I'm not sure how much veracity that is. But is it possible that the people of Egypt who did carve that, or at least did carve it in that image, like recarved the head, had seen that, or somebody had seen that image there, or visited those people and said, hey, we saw this, this half man, half lion, and there was some type of exchange or some type of inspiration to recarve it at one point. Like, is there any? What I'm trying to say is, was there any type of historical record beyond what is currently known that you can see, or may even be able to speak to, for that recarving?
There's nothing.
There's nothing. Okay, well,
there's nothing here. So these are good questions,
continues.
And these are questions that other people can explore. There's gonna be I can guess that there's gonna be a lot more books written about this. Right? This is my last book because I've finished my journey, and I'm sharing my story, which is much greater than we've explored tonight. But there's a lot of directions that people can go. There's a whole playing field for new, young, aspiring authors. That everything isn't based on something that happened 12,000 years ago. There's a much more deeper history further back in time, that 12,000 year thing that all of a sudden people from Europe traveled around the world and told everybody what to do doesn't really add up, because Native Americans have myths that are identical, both celestial and oral myths that they're identical to those in the Mediterranean and in Africa. And Native Americans came across about, out of Beringia 24,000 years or so ago. They came down maybe 16 into the Great Plains. And that's all before 12,000 years ago. And you can actually follow the line of myths going through what is now the Bering Strait into Siberia, all the way into the Mediterranean. So this concept of someone landed on the shores of the Americas and taught everybody what to do doesn't really stack up with the mythology. And I've looked at these Paleolithic images, and there's common characters that are in the Native American myths. Ursa Major as a bear, as a she-bear, is common in North America, as it is in the Paleolithic images among the Greeks and other peoples. So there's a continuous story that has been told. Sometimes it separates a little bit, and there's people have variations that the bear stands up or the bear lays down, or it's a bird that chases the bear, or it's a hunter, a human hunter, but they're fundamentally the same stories, and they're told in the same manners. That dates back to this a far distant place and time.
And with this being placed so far back in time, I know John Anthony West has proposed that potentially that the Sphinx had been carved, as early as you had actually stated, which would have been the previous Age of Leo that common alternative history theories do put it at, which is around the time of the last ice age. But these themes, as you've mentioned, they're found all around Europe. There are very similar animal drawings that are shown in in Asia and Indonesia. I think there's some in the Philippines that were found. I'm not even sure if there's any in mainland China. But with this common theme being shown in cave drawings, one thing I'm noticing, and you did touch on it, which was the animal drawings within Göbekli Tepe, and researchers such as Laird Scranton have theorized that they were teaching areas. So, this kind of, at least, even if you're proposing that it was a shaman, and I know you're not much for the way out there theories in regards to alternative history or ancient alien theory, but that common idea of teaching individuals about the stars, about cosmology, and that being related to the physical world is somewhat of a connecting theme. And I know for some people it may be a stretch. It's just interesting to be able to see that same connection, that same theme being stated from different perspectives, which is also a theme of this show, in two completely different areas. But the main common theme being the animals being able to teach about the physical world. And
correct.
And at the same time also being able to teach about oneself in the psyche. So
Correct.
that kind of blows my mind to a completely different level, because this is something that is being shown within very, very similar time frames. The 12,000 or earlier era from Göbekli Tepe to 33,000, which is, another age, another great cycle of the zodiac from there. So the next question I have to ask is, did you just look at the paintings, or did you look at the other astronomical alignments for that particular area? Or was that just not your area of study?
Okay, I have a few questions. First, point out that I believe that John Anthony West doesn't think that the Sphinx is 36,000 years ago, but rather the first time Tepe is 36,000 years ago, from which the Sphinx was modeled. Okay, so he doesn't say that the Sphinx is 36. He thinks the Sphinx is about 14,000 years ago. And I can't speak one way or the other to that, but we can say that the timing of the concept of the Sphinx is identical. His concept, 35,000, is very close to what we see as an origin, a pictorial origin of what we now see as the Egyptian Sphinx. I can't say when it was actually made, and there were multiple renditions of it, and apparently somebody ultimately took the face from this Paleolithic cave and put it on the line from the Paleolithic cave, and made them two. Okay. Because that's one point. That's important. So going back to this concept of really, so astronomy, okay, and universality. People around the world, the first stories were probably told by looking up at the sky. And someone saw Orion, the constellation that looks like a human being, a man, traveling across the night sky in seasons, and said that that was his journey. And then they put other stars into it. Sirius is a common star around the world as either a dog or Canis Major, the constellation that includes Sirius, is a dog as well. Native Americans across the Mesopotamia, Africa, everybody doesn't call Sirius a dog, but a lot of people call Sirius a dog, or Canis Major a dog, and they use different stars to form the rest of the dog. What I used for this is there's a program called Starry Night Pro 7. It's the same data that NASA uses. Okay, but it's a publicly available software, and I ran how that night sky that I showed you was through the model of Starry Night Pro 7, and we're looking at what they could have seen in the night sky at that time, which is identical to the Paleolithic image. And the stars, through precession, the Earth wobbles and stars go up and down, and you can time the images. You can time images to what's available in the night sky. And so there's a combination of what the archaeologists figured out by calcium deposits that they measured through uranium technique, as well as the astronomy through the NASA program, and we can refine the world that they had. So it's a combination of things, but people carry these traditions throughout time. I'm not an ET person. There's a spectrum of, in an infinite universe, anything is possible. And the other end of the spectrum is that ET's been puppeteering everything that's happened since then. And I'm not on the puppeteering end of the spectrum.
But I recognize that many things are possible, even if I haven't experienced them. And that's a lesson that we all learn today by delving into this cave, that there can be many possibilities, even if they haven't been scientifically evaluated before, that the rest of the world hasn't seen it. And it goes back to the Tuareg riddle of the hares. There can be many truths, even if it's not a truth for everybody.
And yeah, I'm not even sure how to be able to respond to that.
That's what your whole program is about, finding the many truths, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I know, but like,
exploring the possibilities.
Every so often a guest comes on that completely makes me question the paradigm of the world that I'm living in. It makes me question myself at the same time that I just have to look and it's like, oh, like, did I just learn that? And I'm still looking at that multiple like I'm thinking on like the multiple ways that the image can be seen, and how even for myself when I was going through there was a point in time in my life when I was going through a very rough time, and I basically analyzed my life from all different angles, and that same idea of trying to be able to compare different archetypes within yourself. And I was able to basically develop 3, and there were there was at one point it's like, okay, well, these are the three main archetypes that I had identified as far as the personalities I was putting out. One for myself that I gave to my family, one for myself that I gave to my friends and the fans that I was dealing with in the music industry, and one that I dealt with just myself in private. And the idea of that very tribal aspect, I called it 3-tone stone skin. There was those 3 different gradients of color that still that I'd kind of used to differentiate the aspects that had been presented, and I knew that there were different shades and how they kind of overlapped one another, and it took me a while to be able to kind of stop doing that. And it was only through that self-reflection and that self-realization that I was able to kind of mature emotionally and psychologically as a young individual of early 20s into my mid 20s, and that kind of shaped how I had become as a man later on in life. And I'm seeing the same types of similarities in how the story was actually told in that hero's journey we're talking about in that image. It blows my mind so much, because these same psychological tools that some of us don't even necessarily have as individuals nowadays were being taught back then. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, well, who is this something that we can realize and self-actualize ourselves as individuals, or is it something that people tend to discover and it gets lost, and then it's taught within our culture, or within, let's say a medical field, or, some type of higher learning center that people learn? And is this a skill that is not being taken seriously in society today? And is that why we're kind of slowly sinking back into the recesses of hell as a culture? Like, we're technologically advanced, but we are not a high society anymore. We are very hedonistic. We're very narcissistic. We don't care about the planet anymore. We don't care about the animals on here. We don't care about each other anymore. And it's like this realization that, shit, these people knew more about the human, potentially knew more about the human nature than we know ourselves with our flying, our flying machines and instantaneous cross-continental communication. This is important to be able to discuss, not just from an archaeological standpoint, but just from a pure sociological standpoint. And yeah, like, to me, that kind of freaks me out a little bit.
It's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And so today you came to, you've read some of the book and you've seen some of the images, but through the night sky, which you hadn't seen, you've come to face the elephant in the room. How come this was before us for over 100 years, and millions of people have seen it in the media, but we didn't see the elephant in the room? And it's the first, it's a test of who we are as a people.
Well, okay, so because we're gonna have to wrap this up, so I'm gonna try and see if I can segue out of this somehow. I'm usually good at digging my way out of deep philosophical discussions to a final conclusion.
What did you learn about yourself?
I learned that if I can learn it, someone else can learn it. And it's been learned, and whether it was taught by a human or taught by some, as Laird would say, some entity or some being from, potentially from a kind of a paired universe of non-material source, it's still something that tends to be ingrained within us. It's inherent within us as a species. So that's kind of the cool thing I learned today.
We all have the potential. It's just about looking at multiple perspectives, having our minds open to the possibilities.
Now, Chris in chat is stating that the problem is that there's so many elephants. What do you see, at least, I'm not sure exactly how deep you went in terms of the research of the peoples or the background, but what do you see as kind of the main differentiation yourself as far as what could have stopped us teaching this as part of our development process within our growing up as people? When
Europeans arrived on the American shores, these were the same tradition. They had the same traditions, shamanic type of traditions of teaching the apprentice, going through this journey of self-discovery, the vision quest, as these people had in Paleolithic times. So Paleolithic time is the root of what we had in North America, and there are valid shamanic people, traditions of the United States. People Jungians, people who read Joseph Campbell in mythology and study it from the psychological standpoint. They're looking to explore that same journey. So people do these things today. Eckhart Tolle is a brilliant philosopher of our modern times who seeks to find the inner self. There's many people who are seeking that, and we have the capacity to step into the cave as the apprentice did 34,000 years ago and stare at those red discs and not see it. But ultimately we can. And by seeing the forest through the trees, we can learn a great deal about ourselves. We can learn where we've come from and where we're going as a people, as a global society, not just Americans or white people or tall people, whatever it is. Identity is an illusion. We're all of one people. We're all the same cultural background, and we all have the capacity to grow as individuals.
It's I'm going to leave it with this. It's I'd mentioned it before. I came in expecting some archaeological new discovery, and I actually came away learning more about ourselves as people, and in our psyche, which is considerably more important than the nuts and bolts. It's not just about where we came from. It's who we are as people, and sometimes we forget about that. And I'm strongly going to recommend that anybody check out this book. The link is in the show notes. Please do go read it. And I'm gonna have to go back and read the rest of it now myself to help make sense of exactly.
You just started the journey.
Oh crap! I thought I was still on it, but it's like, no, you're still at the beginning. So the book the book is Before Orion, exploring finding the face of
the face of the hero,
and it's this is about exploring the hero's journey. Written by Bernie Taylor. It's available on Amazon.com or .ca or .co.uk, and you can get it in Kindle edition as well, if I'm not mistaken.
It's in ebooks in all formats.
It's in ebooks in all formats, so you don't have to worry about getting delivery. You can actually get it by one-click purchasing. It is a direct link. We do not use affiliated marketing, although I just for me, they say it's the smart thing to do with podcasts. For me, it's just like, I bring stuff on the show that I think will help people and expand people's minds a little bit. So, the knowing that we can change people's lives, that's enough payment for me when it comes to that and helping get the word out on what I believe is a fantastic discovery that'll really make people think. I'm trying to think of what outro music I can actually use for this one. Scattered Knowledge is unfortunately off my iPad for some reason. So I guess we're going to go with... let's see, how much... Oh, we'll use this one. This one's actually by an artist called Dexter Britton. I don't think I've ever played it. And the track is called Waking Up. So that seemed pretty apropos. There we go. Ooh, nice piano right there. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been The Den of Lore, episode 54. First broadcast on, as the date says, up there, January 12th, 2018. And this has been a fantastic presentation with Bernie Taylor. Next week on the show... Let's see if I can still... There we go. Next week on the show, we've got Chris Christensen, and we will be discussing logos and symbols, hidden technology, and Gnostic Masonry. And that'll be January 19th at around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I say around because we all know that I never start the show on time. But again, I want to thank everyone, and especially to a viewer out there who, during the show, donated a clear C note to donated $100 to the show. And you're helping us build a better tomorrow in the Den of Lore, and I want to say thank you very much to whomever you are. It is much appreciated, and we all appreciate your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for joining us. Have yourselves a wonderful night and a wonderful weekend.
Oh.